Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Chapter 14, where we are talking about plant structures. Last time we talked about leaves. This time we're going to be talking about specifically vascular tissue. Okay, here is a picture of two of the types of vascular tissue. We are going to talk about xylem first. And if you read right here, it says transpiration of water, which may or may not mean much to you other than water. Now, xylem transports water from the roots to the rest of the plant by the processes of capillary action and transpiration. Well, you know a little more. You know it transports water from the roots up the plant, and there's two processes involved. Okay, we will talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so don't forget these things. Capillary action, transpiration related to xylem and water. Okay, but next let's go to phloem. Now, phloem's a little bit easier to get out of the way, so we're going to talk about it before we go on and talk about how xylem actually brings the water up. Okay, because usually you think, water down. Okay, now, phloem is living cells. Xylem is dead cells. Okay, so xylem, you can see they're empty, and it's kind of like a long tube. Phloem has stuff in it. However, because the phloem is busy and it is hollow in order to make a tube, although it's living, it has to have what's called a companion cell. Now, a companion cell is basically a cell that makes food and does all the chemical processes and things that a cell is supposed to do, and then gives it to the phloem. It says, here, you need this, and gives it over to it. Okay, so the phloem is taken care of by its companion. Now, the overall purpose of phloem is that it transports sugar, specifically glucose, and here it says sucrose, another type of sugar, made out of glucose, and it's made by photosynthesis. We talked about that yesterday with the leaves. Now, it transports sugar from specifically source cells in the leaves to the sink cells of the plant. Now, a source, where things come from. Okay, a source cell, it's just kind of a generic cell in the picture, is primarily a cell that makes a lot of sugar. So usually it's going to be, like you think of, a leaf. There are a few stems that have some photosynthesis, but primarily for plants it's leaves. So you're going to have the sugar come from those cells, go down to the source or to the sink cells. A sink, if you know electricity, is where it goes to. It's where there's less. Okay? Roots, they don't see a whole lot of sunlight usually. There's a few plants that have above ground roots, but generally roots, they're in the dark most of the time. So they're not doing photosynthesis, but they still need to have the substance to survive. So what happens is the phloem will carry it from the source cells, the leaves, down to the rest of the plant that doesn't have photosynthesis, and those would be considered the sink cells. Any of the cells that don't have photosynthesis themselves or don't have a lot of it. Okay, so like I said, some of the stems, things like that, might have a little bit, but not enough to stay alive. The way to remember which one goes which way, phloem flows down. It's stupid, it's basic, but I remembered it from middle school and I'm old, so if I can remember it, you can remember it. Phloem flows down. Okay, and it's not going to be taking water because there's no water up high, so it has to be taking the sugar down. Okay, so that's pretty much what phloem is. It's a living cell taken care of by its companion, and it transports sugar pretty much from top to bottom, but not just top to bottom, but from where there's a lot of sugar to where there's not, which is mostly down because the leaves are up. Okay, now our xylem friend here with its dead cells doesn't need to be taken care of because, it's dead. So there's no companion cells, none of that. It's basically a giant straw inside the tree. Okay, and that's not a bad way to think about it, except it's made out of plant cells instead of plastic. Okay, so we know it brings water up. We know water is coming from the roots. But the question is why is water going up? It doesn't generally do that. We think water goes down with gravity. Okay? That's because of that thing called capillary action and the other thing called transpiration. They kind of defy gravity in this scenario. Now, if you think back, way back to the beginning of the school year, I know that's a long time ago, but try. You do remember things from before the beginning of the school year. We talked a lot about water. And water has a unique property. And it has to do with the fact that it's sticky. Remember, it's polar, it has a little bit of a charge, it causes it to stick to things, including itself. And that leads to the property of capillarity or capillary action. This is where water moves upwards through narrow spaces by cohesion, which is water sticking to itself, and adhesion, where water is sticking to other things. And remember, the smaller the tube or the space, the farther it goes. So this is how paper towels work, straws work. Well, not really straws, but you can, if you put your straw in your drink, remember you can see your drink a little bit above where the rest of your drink is. Okay, that's capillary action, especially the idea of the paper towels. You just touch the paper towel to it, and it just soaks it right up. That's because the water is sticking in the paper towel. Now, the issue being is when it comes to plants, capillary action only works for 10 meters, which is about 30 feet. So that's pretty good for most plants, and it can, it covers a lot of things, but it's not going to be enough. Okay, now the picture you see on the left is actually a very fun experiment to do. At least for, people that are trapped inside and have nothing else to do. And it's kind of cool to have the flowers afterwards. But basically, if you take some white flowers, carnations work well. Believe it or not, celery works, romaine works. Usually things that are really light colored work and kind of stiff, but it's even best if they have leaves on them. If you take these things, you cut the bottom off so the stem is open again, and you stick them in water that has food coloring. The darker, the better. The plant, by capillary action, will pull the color up into the plant. And sometimes that's how you actually get these special plants, especially flowers, that they try to sell to you for like twice or three times the cost because they're so different. You can make them yourself. Okay, go buy some daisies or carnations or something like that, and you can color them on your own. Okay, but you can do this experiment with anything, and some people have fun. If you get a plant that has a thick stem, you actually can split it between two colors, and you'll end up with a plant that's two different colors. Okay, so enough about flower colors. But like I said, it gets up pretty far. I mean, 30 feet's about, 3 stories on a building. So that's very good considering nothing, the plant's not doing any work. The water just automatically goes up. Okay. However, there are a couple plants in this world that are seriously taller than 30 feet. If you look at these redwoods um, and the cars and vans and campers and the people are almost too small to notice. There are a few of them in the picture, but I've never seen them in person. I would absolutely love to see these redwood trees just because of how enormous they are, to think of a living thing that big. But 30 feet for these plants, not so good. If you're relying on capillary action to get water to this plant's going to be in serious trouble. Okay, so the question is, what does it do? How in the world, if capillary action only gets it up 30 feet, what about the other, 200 feet? Okay, or more, depending on the tree here. Okay, there is a process that goes on. Remember, there's 2 different processes. Okay, water going up because of cohesion, adhesion, also known as capillary action. Talked about that. However, that only, like I said, goes up 30 feet. So pretend, this tree is like, 40 feet tall. What happens for the rest of the plant? Well, it happens to be something called transpiration. Now, if you notice in there you have the spear, like respiration, breathing, that kind of thing. What ends up happening is, if you remember yesterday, we talked about these stomata, these little holes on the bottom of the leaves. The water actually evaporates from those leaves. Okay, the water as a gas just leaves the leaves. Okay, now what that does is, because the water's pulling on the water or attracted to the water behind it, it pulls the next water molecule up a little bit. And then that one will evaporate. And then it pulls another one up behind it, causing that one to evaporate. And it basically creates this vacuum, literally like sucking on a straw. And it is able to pull up the water through these tiny little vessels until it's able to get up to the top of these enormous trees, some of which are thousands of years old. If that doesn't make you wonder, I mean, think about a tree that's, was around when Jesus walked the earth. It's pretty impressive, So those things are enormous, and this is how the water is able to get to the top. Okay? So it is pretty amazing what God planned. Little holes in the leaves so the water can go up. And that way the plant won't die. If somebody can explain this by evolution, I would be impressed. This looks like a well laid out plan to me. Okay, I will talk to you next time.